It's my pleasure to rise to speak to Bill 19, and I have a number of different thoughts, and I'll try as best I can to organize them. I will, I guess, start by saying that I'm in favor of the bill, and I will be voting to support it. I do have some concerns, and in order to sort of get a better perspective on the bill, I sought some input from a number of different quarters. I spoke with representatives of Alberta students. A number of them I got to know quite well during the course of a recent political campaign I was involved in, and I was proud to have them as part of my campaign team. And they are certainly enthusiastically in favor of Bill 19. They've indicated that many of the things in Bill 19 were things that they've been advocating for some time, and especially with regards to the certainty surrounding tuition fees and linking maximum tuition fee increases to the consumer price index. So that part is good. I also spoke with officials at some of the universities that I know, and specifically I spoke to people at Lakeland College, which is located, of course, in Vermilion Lloydminster, with a campus in each of those two centres. And there are also concerns expressed there, but the concerns, I would say, are sort of phrased in this way. The officials at those institutions, not just Lakeland College, but others, are saying that they appreciate the need for some degree of certainty and stability in terms of costs for students, and that Bill 19 provides this. But concomitant with that is the requirement for the post-secondary institutions to have some degree of certainty with regards to their funding, which clearly is not solely provided by tuition fees, only a percentage. And it's a varying percentage depending on the institution and depending on the time frame we're looking at, but only a small percentage of the actual instructional fee is covered, or the instructional costs rather, of a university are covered by tuition fees. And because of that, there is a reliance on behalf of universities to find other sources of revenue. Certainly the government grant each year is a significant source of that revenue, but there are other sources of revenue that universities have worked very hard to enhance. And as an example, I'll use the example of alumni support or extension. One of the things that is a difference between what we have in our culture in Canada and the United States, and while for the most part I would take Canadian culture over American culture any day of the week, if there's one area that I wish we could be more like the Americans, and that is in alumni support of our post-secondary institutions. They do a much better job of this than we do, and it's hard to really explain. I've talked to extension officers at a number of different universities and colleges and asked, what is it that makes us different? Why is it that somebody who attends a post-secondary institution in the United States is almost branded and knows the fight song of their college alma mater till the day they die? I was attending a hockey game in Anaheim a number of years ago and got involved with a fight song singing contest between supporters of USC and UCLA in the duck pond at Anaheim, where they had to explain to people what icing and offside was, but when it came to the break between periods and the USC Trojans marching band came out and performed, the UCLA fans would start singing the UCLA fight song, and then the USC fans would go back and forth, this sort of antiphonal effect that went on within the arena. It was remarkable. But that is something that Canadian universities and colleges struggle with, although I would point out that in recent years, we have seen significant, very generous gifts being given to institutions right across Canada, and certainly right here in Alberta there have been some very significant gifts to fund specific programs, chairs in different fields of study, and I think that's positive. But I do express a concern with regards to overall quality and sustainability of our post-secondary institutions. Clearly, this piece of legislation is going to put I'll call it a harness, or at least a brake on tuition fee increases. It's clearly going to be a lever that is not available to post-secondary institutions in terms of increasing their revenue. And because, of course, that money comes out of students' pockets, I can understand the need for that. But it is then, I think, more important that we put emphasis on the other sources of revenue and having some stability there, and that's challenging. If you're going to guarantee an international student, for example, the exact amount of their tuition for the next 4 years, but the post-secondary institution does not know what it's going to receive as a government grant even the following year, it creates some potential problems. And now I know there's going to be some in the room that are going to point out that I was part of a government in the 2013 budget that cut the post-secondary or the Alberta Advanced Education budget by 7%. And I will tell you that that was a decision that at the time seemed to be appropriate, but in talking to various post-secondary institutions since that decision was made and seeing the difficulties that are created within Lakeland College, I know that that sort of cut, when they're anticipating a 2% increase and in fact having a 7% cut, that's like a 9% chasm in their funding. And that's very, very difficult. That required some very, very difficult decisions to be made at Lakeland College with regards to cutting programs that were very good programs, were well subscribed to, but unfortunately were also very costly to deliver, and there was no way to increase the tuition to try to do a cost recovery on those. So, stable funding is something that I think is important, but I wanted to broaden the conversation about post-secondary education a little bit because I think it is important that we put it in context of what purpose it serves in Alberta society and what our needs are. Alberta has the youngest population in Canada. We've said that the average age of Albertans, I believe the number is 36. And Alberta also has the lowest participation rate in post-secondary education in the country. That seems paradoxical, but that's in fact the statistic. Alberta has the lowest post-secondary education participation rate. Now, some have suggested that's because people can go straight out of high school or even not complete high school and go straight into working in the oil patch and earning very large salaries. And while that is a factor, to be sure, it is not the sole reason. The impact of having a low post-secondary participation rate, though, is something that we have to take a look at. It means that in order for us to have the various highly educated tradespeople, highly educated university graduates to be our doctors, our nurses, our veterinarians, our pharmacists, and teachers, and a number of other fields, Alberta has to bring them in from other jurisdictions, from the provinces or from other countries. And part of the challenge with doing that is that you have to attract them to come here. And we know that the oil and gas sector, at times when things are going well, pay quite large salaries, and it inflates the salaries of everyone. Now, most of the time, that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it does require that we take a look at what is our post-secondary education capacity. Is it sufficient, and what should we be looking at in the long term, in the 8 to 10 year time frame, and that's not really that long term, in terms of do we need to increase capacity? And my answer to that is yes, we do, and the number that has been arrived at by Alberta's 26 post-secondary institutions is approximately 90,000 additional spaces to what we have today. 47,000 of that is roughly just to get Alberta to the Canadian average for post-secondary participation rate, just to get us to the average, not even to the highest. An additional 40,000 is roughly because we have a young and very rapidly growing population. And if we just keep up with population growth, we will need 40,000 additional spaces. So that, you add that up, it comes to just under 90,000 additional spaces. And the planning for that has to go ahead. The second question that needs to be asked is a broader discussion on affordability and accessibility, and asking ourselves the question, what impact does affordability and tuition fees have on access to post-secondary education, and what can we do to lessen that impact? It even begs the question, should post-secondary education be free? I know that's been advocated by some student organizations, including the National Union of Students. They've suggested that it should be free, and in some countries it is indeed free. I do have some issues with that, and I think to make that change, especially if it was made abruptly, I think would create some significant issues. But I will say that Canada, unfortunately, ranks 14th out of 16 OECD countries in providing scholarships to post-secondary students. 14th out of 16. So if we're talking about making post-secondary education more accessible and trying to get a higher participation rate, that is certainly something that we could do, is at least look at what we're offering in terms of scholarships, awards, bursaries, grants, and loans. And, you know, as far as that goes, that's something that we have to look at ourselves. What could we do to improve that? I'm actually pleased that I contribute annually to 2 different scholarships at institutions, at mostly Lakeland College, but we've also given students attending other institutions. One named in memory of my former partner, Dr. Malcolm Gray, for students entering animal health science or veterinary medicine, and a second named in honor of my former classmate, Dr. Kenneth Smith, who was an instructor for many years in the animal health technology program at Lakeland College. Kenny passed away a couple of years ago, and a bunch of us that are classmates of Kenny contribute to a scholarship that was established in his memory. And that's a good thing, and I think we should all look for opportunities for doing that and fund students in whatever field of endeavor is important to you. For me, it's veterinary medicine. For someone else, it might be social work, it might be education, it might be a variety of different fields. But I think that is something that we can do, and I think that 14th out of 16th level is nothing that Canada should be proud of. Finally, in the support of research and innovation, while Alberta has some of the greatest innovators and researchers anywhere in the world, and we do incredible work like the development, for example, of the Edmonton Protocol for islet cell transplants for type 1 diabetes patients, which is world-leading, absolutely world-leading. We, unfortunately, from the Conference Board of Canada last year, got a D grade in their report on research and innovation in Canada. We need to do better. We need to find out what it is that we can do to better support our researchers. But just last month, I visited researchers at the University of Alberta who are working on providing a marker for prostate cancer that means that someone who has a high PSA antigen on the test, who the next diagnostic test was to do a highly invasive biopsy, which, if it didn't actually have the luck of hitting the tumor cells, would come up as a false negative. They're developing actually a test that would just involve a blood test that is a much higher sensitivity and a higher specificity rate for determining whether or not that patient has prostate cancer and whether they have to proceed with additional, more invasive forms of treatment. That's happening at the University of Alberta. That's technology that is being developed here that isn't being worked on anywhere else in the world. And if it works, and certainly the initial findings are very promising, if it works, it is something that the university plans to make commercially available. And the cost of doing that test is roughly 1/4 the cost of doing biopsies, and is, you know, just think of the level of invasiveness. We're talking about a blood sample, a single venipuncture in your arm compared to the current means of taking biopsies on men with prostate cancer, which is, I won't go into the details here. You're welcome. Madam Chair, I will tell you that I'm proud to be a former student at one of our post-secondary institutions. I attended the University of Alberta for 2 years in the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry. I was an Aggie. I hated the engineers. They hated us, and it was all good. And but after that, I completed my pre-veterinary studies and went to the University of Saskatchewan. But I will tell you, I'm proud of the experience I had. I'm proud of what we have in our province in terms of post-secondary institutions and our 26 institutions. But I think it's something that we have to look at, always trying to make better. I support Bill 19 because I think Bill 19 does make things better, but I don't think we can stop with Bill 19. I think there are other issues we have to address. I think we have to continue to work with the leadership of Campus Alberta, those 26 institutions across our province, and strive to make Alberta a world leader in post-secondary education, which is, I think, one of the key things in growing and developing and diversifying our economy. Thank you, Madam Chair.